Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Independence Day. My name is Sean Murray, and I'm proud to serve as the president of the Texas Military Forces Historical Foundation. And on behalf of the Adjutant General of Texas and the Texas Military Department, I want to thank you for attending today's ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please rise for the arrival of the Color Guard and the presentation of the colors?
Left wheel, march! Reset your fire locks! Right wheel, march! Forward, march!
Thank you. Please be seated. Events like this wouldn't be possible without the support of the community, and I want to thank the following sponsors for our celebration today. Ms. Susan Hall, King's Hobby Shop, the Veteran Suicide Prevention Channel, and HMG and Associates. And of course, this event would not have been possible without the support of the following groups who have taken time out of their busy schedule to participate in today's events. First of all, the members of the 36th Infantry Division Band, Georgetown and Austin chapters of the Sons of the American Revolution, members of the museum's Living History Attachment, and Mrs. Chris Hunt, who did our flyers, logos, and programs for today. 250 years ago, a group of ordinary men did an extraordinary thing. They put their names on a piece of parchment and declared to the world that all people are created equal, endowed with rights that no king, no government, and no army could ever take away. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors, not for themselves alone, but for generations they would never meet. Assembled here today are those generations. Here in Texas, we know something about fighting for freedom. Long before we joined this great union, Texans stood at the Alamo, at Goliad, and at San Jacinto, refusing to bow to tyranny. And when we did join the United States, we brought that fighting spirit with us. The Texas Military Forces, the Texas Army National Guard, the Texas Air National Guard, and the Texas State Guard carry that spirit today. They have carried it through World War I and World War II, through Korea and Vietnam, through Desert Shield and Desert Storm, through Iraq and Afghanistan, and they've carried it through hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and guarding the border right here at home. The mission of the Texas Military Forces Historical Foundation is to preserve and honor that legacy, to make sure the stories of these brave men and women are never forgotten. Because the people who forget their history are a people in danger of losing their future. I want to take a moment to acknowledge those among us today who have worn the uniform. Veterans, active duty, reserves, and those of the National Guard here with us today in this crowd. Would you please stand or raise your hand if you have served or are currently serving in our military? Thank you. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Everything we celebrate today, everything we enjoy, every freedom we take for granted, you protected it. We owe these men and women a debt that can never be fully repaid, but we will spend every day trying. And to the families of those who served, spouses, parents, children, brothers and sisters, thank you as well. Your sacrifice is real. We live in complicated times. Turn on any television, scroll through any phone, and it can feel more like we are more divided than ever. But when you look around at the gathering like this one, families sitting together, children waiting expectantly for cake and punch, neighbors sharing food and laughter, you can see the real America. You see what's worth defending, and you see what all those soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen volunteered to protect. But freedom isn't just a word. Freedom is your grandmother dancing to a live band underneath a live oak tree on a summer evening. Freedom is your child asking 100 questions and knowing they live in a place where curiosity and education are celebrated. Freedom is the ability to disagree, to debate, to worship as you choose, and to come together on days like today and simply be grateful for the freedoms that we enjoy. So tonight, when the fireworks light up the sky, I hope you'll pause for just a moment. Think of the soldiers at Valley Forge who shivered through a brutal winter so we could stand here in the sun. Think of the young men who stormed the beaches of Normandy and Anzio. Think of the Texas Guard men and women who deployed far from home and the ones who answered the call right here after our last major storm. And then look around at the people beside you, your family, your neighbors, your community, and feel the full weight and wonder of what it means to be free. Happy birthday, America. God bless America, and may God bless the great state of Texas. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us on this very, very special day. This once-in-a-lifetime event that we are so privileged to live through. We are celebrating a moment in history. 250 years ago, one of the most remarkable things in the long story of mankind took place in the Pennsylvania State House, the place we now call Independence Hall. But 250 years ago, it was not history yet. 250 years ago, the men who sat in this room were living in the moment. Just like today, we are living in the moment. They did not know how the events that they had set in motion would turn out. They only knew what had come before. And for them, their history ended on July 3rd of 1776. It had been 149 years since the first English colony had been founded at Jamestown in the Chesapeake Bay. It wasn't until 1620 that the second colony had been founded in Plymouth. And in those 149 years, 13 colonies had sprung up on the eastern seaboard of a vast and largely unexplored continent. From Massachusetts to Georgia. They were settled by very different people over a long span of time and for very different reasons. Some came for religious purposes. Some came to escape trouble back in the old world. Some came to seek their fortune. All of them came filled with hope. It took 3 to 4 months to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Coming from England to America, it would take half that much to go back. And for the first 60 years of colonial existence, there was virtually no contact with England. The supply ships would come more settlers would come. Many of them would die of disease before they had been here for very long. And the colonies were allowed to make their own way. They had been thrown onto the coast of a continent and had found something that they had not been particularly looking for. And that something was freedom. A freedom unlike anything anyone in human history had ever known. The freedom to build something new, to explore, to make something of themselves that they would never have been able to make in the old world. And for 60 years of what we historians call salutary neglect, the colonists bent the twig and the tree began to grow. And after 60 years, when England looked up from troubles of its own and cast an eye across the Atlantic Ocean, it saw 13 prosperous colonies. And it realized that it had a very valuable asset. But that very valuable asset was not benefiting England alone. And that was a problem. So the English began to make laws requiring our trade to be primarily with England, requiring us to buy primarily English goods. And although the American colonists complained, they believed themselves to be loyal Englishmen. And they accepted those laws and they lived under them. In 1689, the first of a series of wars began that would start in Europe and transfer themselves to America. As the British colonies along the eastern seaboard, the French colony in what today we call Canada, and the Spanish colony in Florida, and the various Indian tribes allied with the three sides, began to fight one another for control of the continent. The first three of those wars were indecisive, but the fourth war is not a war that begins in Europe, it's a war that begins in America, over the question of who would control the Ohio River Valley, England or France. And that war comes to be known as the French and Indian War, or in Europe they call it the 7 Years' War. And at the end of the 7 Years' War, the English and their colonial subjects had achieved victory. France and Spain had been defeated. The French completely ejected from the Western Hemisphere. Spain reduced to the land west of the Mississippi. And there was a great moment of victory. It was a moment of pride in being English. But that moment of pride held the seed of war. Because after the war was over, the British insisted that America pay taxes to help fund that war, while at the same time forbidding Americans from moving west into the territory that had been won in that war. The American colonists believed that this was unfair, and they protested. They objected. And the British responded by doing something England had never done before, by imposing direct taxation on the American colonies. The colonists had always paid taxes, but they had paid taxes that were enacted by their own colonial legislatures. Legislatures that they had chosen with their votes. Legislatures that they could recall with their votes if they were unhappy with its actions and with its taxes. But now these taxes were being made by a parliament 3,000 miles away. A parliament that had no idea of the realities of America, that had no idea of the realities of the American people and the American spirit. A parliament that insisted on its supremacy. And when the colonists objected to these taxes as a violation of their rights as Englishmen, an argument over who gets what out of the French and Indian War and who should pay what for the French and Indian War transformed into something unexpected. It transformed into an argument over the rights of the people versus the powers of the government. And the Americans said, as Englishmen, we have certain rights. And that among these rights, we are free to elect the people who impose the taxes. And the British said, you are not Englishmen, you are colonists. You are second class. You do not have those rights, but the Parliament does have that power. And for the next decade, that debate, sometimes physical and violent, seesawed back and forth, with the British gaining the upper hand and then the Americans retaking it.
Events like the Stamp Act and the Stamp Act Congress, events like the Boston Tea Party, ultimately led to the point where although England and America spoke the same language, the words did not mean the same thing. Democracy here was real democracy, whereas in England it was a false democracy. Freedom here was a real freedom, whereas in Europe that kind of freedom simply did not, had not, could not exist. And so the moment came when the colonists realized that civil unrest, civil disobedience, petitions and riots, and refusals to buy British goods or to sell our goods to England would not do the trick. The colonists believed that the king, George III, was a good king, that he did not know what his ministers were doing to his subjects in America, and nothing they had tried had broken through to the king. And so how do we get the attention of the king, the good king, who would set things right if only he knew they had gone wrong? And so the decision was made to arm ourselves and to prepare for military action. And on April 19th of 1775, the shot turned round the world at Lexington and the ensuing Battle of Concord, followed by the siege of Boston, the capture of Fort Ticonderoga, the movement of artillery from that captured fort through mountains and snow by Henry Knox to Boston, so that in March of 1776, the British would be forced to evacuate the city. By 1776, the war had been going on for almost a year, and it was pretty sure that George III knew it was happening. We had gotten the king's attention, and yet the king had not made things right. In fact, the king had made things worse. He had declared war on our commerce. His troops had burned American towns and villages. They had attacked American settlers. They had fought Americans on the battlefield. They were hiring Hessian mercenaries to come and wage war against us. They were encouraging the Indians on the frontier to launch attacks on us. And now it was obvious that George III was not our friend. George III, to the disappointment and the dismay of so many, had become our enemy. And the question then was, what do we do? We believe we have rights, and the English deny those rights, and our efforts to make the British accept and recognize those rights have failed. And where do we go from here? And there was really only one place to go. And everyone knew where that place was. It was independence. And that was a hard thing to acknowledge. They had spent their lives thinking of themselves as Englishmen. And now they realized that they had no future as Englishmen. In January of 1776, a man named Thomas Paine published a pamphlet called Common Sense. And in that pamphlet, which was wildly popular, it sold 150,000 copies in a population of 2 million people in just 3 months. In Common Sense, Thomas Paine destroyed the theological justification of divine monarchy. The King of England was not God's chosen on the throne. He was a man, like you and I are men. He is owed no allegiance unless he is a good king, and he has not been a good king. It is insane to think that a people 3,000 miles away can govern another people. It is sure that America has an enormous opportunity here to do something that no people have ever been given the chance to do, and that is to start over, to build a new world in a new world, avoiding all the mistakes and errors of the old. And so a debate began. The debate swayed back and forth because independence was a momentous thing. But the tide could only go in one place. And by the end of June of 1776, a committee had been appointed to draft the Declaration. Benjamin Franklin was on that committee. And John Adams was on that committee. And Thomas Jefferson. And Roger Sherman. And Richard Livingston. The man who would do the writing was Jefferson. Not because he wanted to, but because Franklin had a rule. He would never write anything that someone else would edit. And John Adams said, "Everyone dislikes me because I am such a zealot for independence, and if I write it, people will oppose it because I am the author." And so it fell to Jefferson. And at the beginning of July of 1776, the question had been put before the Congress: independence, yes or no? And on July 2nd of that year, after lengthy debate, impassioned debate, the Congress voted to declare the independence of the American colonies. And having voted for it, they decreed that there should be a statement to our own people and a statement to the world as to why we were taking this step. And so on July 3rd, Jefferson's document was laid before the Congress, and it was debated, and things were added, and things were subtracted. But by the next day, on July 4th, they had something that they were all willing to accept. That's something that we are gathered here today, that moment we are gathered here today, to celebrate and to remember, not just because of its historical importance, which is vast, but because of what that document said. One of the greatest pieces of writing in the history of humanity. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 states of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band which have connected them to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that we should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by acknowledging the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpation, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of England is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. And what follows are 16 specific charges against the king and the government in England, waging war on the American colonies, taking from them the right to run their own governments, to elect their own representatives, to manage their own courts, to trade with the rest of the world. And at the end of that long indictment, Jefferson continued, We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that they have all political connection between them and the state of Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with the firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And it was done. The document. The document was only signed by one person that day, and that was the President of the Second Continental Congress, John Hancock, who wrote his name big and bold in the center of the page, underneath the last line. And as he finished, he stepped away and he said, "I suppose that that's big enough for George III to see it all the way over there in England." George III, of course, could have no idea what was happening 3,000 miles away on July 4th, but he kept a diary. And on July 4th of 1776, George III wrote this: "Nothing important happened today." But of course, something very important had happened. Something monumental. These words, drawn from American experience, drawn from the knowledge of history held by the founding fathers, the ideas of Locke and Rousseau, put into practical purpose, did something that no document had ever done. Did something that no leaders had ever done. They had declared that government exists by the consent of the governed and only by the consent of the governed. That governments were at the mercy of the people, the servants of the people. That when government ceased to be the servant of the people had a right to rebel against it and create new government. And more than that, this document says that our rights are not given to us by a king. They're not given to us by a parliament. They're not given to us by an oligarchy or a class. They're given to us by God and by nature. We are born with them, and government exists to defend them and to protect them and to enlarge them, not to constrain and not to restrict and not to take away. And for that, we were willing to wage war. July 2nd, the Congress voted to declare independence. July 4th, it adopted this declaration. On the intervening day, July 3rd, the vanguard of a 30,000-man British army began to land on Staten Island in New York Harbor, the same island that today hosts the Statue of Liberty. Opposing them were 28,000 ragtag Americans under the command of George Washington. And when this declaration was read to the troops, and they cheered mightily, and the statue of George III in the center of New York was pulled down and melted into bullets, the American people and the American Army knew what they were fighting for. But as beautiful, as important, as meaningful as these words are, they are just that. They are words on a piece of paper that would mean nothing in 1776 if the colonies, now the states, lost the war. If we were conquered by the Redcoats, this document goes into the dustbin of history. It becomes nothing more than useful evidence in the trial of rebels and traitors who would be hung. And as Ben Franklin said after this was adopted, well, now we all must hang together, or we all surely hang separately. And so what gives this document life are the men who were willing to stand in the line of battle, to man the cannon, and to face the British bayonets. And although they were willing and they were brave, within 6 months, they had lost 5 battles in a row. New York City had fallen. Washington's army was being chased across New Jersey, and half of it had disappeared through casualties, inspired enlistments, and desertion. The British were pursuing, but not too vigorously, because they figured it was done. The war was already won. Winter would finish off what was left of Washington's sad bag of rebels. And yet, not all hope was lost. During the retreat across New Jersey, our friend Thomas Paine, who's now joined the Army, looks around and he notices that half of the men who had started the campaign in New York are gone. But what impressed him was that the other half were still there, unpaid, poorly clothed, badly equipped, wearing summer uniforms that were already rags, many with no shoes to wear, no food in their bellies, and yet they stayed with the colors. And he writes this, another pamphlet entitled The American Crisis. These are the times that tries men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot in this crisis will desert the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the thanks of man and woman, for tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. For that which we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. Within a few weeks, those ragged Continentals under George Washington would launch a daring counterattack across the Delaware River. They would overrun and destroy a Hessian garrison at Trenton. And then a few days later, they would stand off a British counterattack in that same place before slipping away to strike at the British hand in Princeton. 3 battles within the span of a week and a half, and 3 American victories. And those victories proved to the English, they proved to the world, they proved to ourselves that we were not beaten, that free men cannot be beaten. As long as we are true to ourselves, as Thomas Paine said, victory is inevitable. And the victory came 6 long years later at Yorktown, but it came. And when it came, these words became enshrined in history, not swept into a dustbin. These words are the birth of a new idea, a new concept, a new faith. And all of American history, from that moment to this, is in some way about this country living up to the ideas that the men of the Continental Congress adopted on this day 250 years ago. But as was the case in 1776, it has always been the case that these ideas will not continue to exist if we do not believe in them, if we do not cherish them, if we do not vote to protect them, if we do not prove ourselves willing to fight for them. And throughout our history, the bulwark of these words has always been the American fighting man and woman. What you see behind me, the men who fought in the Revolution, the men who fought in the War of 1812, the men who fought in the war with Mexico, those who fought in our Civil War and the wars on the frontier, those who served in the colonial wars and went to the border during the punitive expedition, the American soldier, the doughboy of World War I, the GI of World War II, and the Korean conflict, the American soldiers who stood on the ramparts of freedom during the long twilight struggle of the Cold War, the American soldier who went and fought in Vietnam, the American soldiers who were the thunder and lightning of Operation Desert Storm, and those who have carried the torch during the global war on terror. One long, unbroken line of heroes. The veterans that we cherish, the servicemen and women that we support today, are all the descendants of those Revolutionary War soldiers who gave the first real meaning to the words of this declaration, who give us the right as free people. And now, on this afternoon of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the greatest nation on the greatest continent by the greatest people that have ever existed in human history, I ask you to join me in giving 3 cheers for George Washington, our armed forces, and our common country. Hip, hip. Hooray! Hip, hip. Hooray! Hip, hip. Hooray!
All right.
And now, to celebrate our independence, we will fire a volley of musketry and a celebratory cannon shot that will direct your attention to the left. Fire off!
How many years?
Up, Joe! Fire off!
Oh, my ears.
At elevation. Present.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, fellow citizens, thank you for coming today. Thank you for sharing this momentous occasion with us. And to continue the celebration, we invite you to meet the troops, to have your picture taken in Independence Hall, and to come inside the museum for free birthday cake, iced tea, and lemonade. And God bless